Ouch! Stop it! Somebody help! Mary suddenly burst into my room while I was in the middle of a remote meeting. The bad feeling I had was spot on. Through the screen of the meeting that Jack was also attending, I saw Mary pin me down and reach for something. A cold sweat ran down my entire body. Please stop. I pleaded with my eyes, but Mary ignored my will. I tried desperately to stop her, but in the struggle, I was pushed away, fell, and hit my head hard. The next moment, the lighter in Mary's hand set fire. Suddenly, a voice shouted from the computer, "Call the police."
What?
Mary froze, lifting her head in shock. She didn't realize it. She wasn't aware that her reckless actions were being broadcast live. My name is Emily, and it's been 2 years since I got married. I met my husband, Jack, at work. He's in sales, and I'm in tech. After that pandemic spread, our department quickly transitioned to remote work, and these days, I only go into the office a few times a month. However, since the office is close to our apartment, we can come to work anytime. As for Jack, being in sales, he continues to go to the office as usual. Considering his job, I think it's only natural. Jack's mom, Mary, lives nearby, so she frequently comes to our place. Ever since his dad passed away 2 years ago, she's been dropping by unannounced and complaining to me, which is really bothersome. Even though I barely interact with her, she still goes out of her way to come over and complain, and I always wish she wouldn't. At first, Mary's visits were about once a week, but lately, it's increased to 2 or 3 times a week. She even shows up while I'm working, barging into the room. Then, she stands behind me and keeps making snide remarks.
Is this really how you work? You need to be more serious about it.
I try to block out Mary's voice by playing loud music while continuing my work, but it ends up distracting me, slowing down my work pace. Could you please talk to her, Jack? Ask her to be a little quieter. One night, after Jack came home, I tried to appeal to him, but he just gave a light laugh and responded,
"Don't worry about it so much. Mom doesn't mean any harm. She's just concerned."
Hearing his words, I felt a heaviness in my chest. If Mary is really concerned, why does she speak in such a way that undermines my work? And why doesn't Jack understand how I feel? But it's hard to hear the same thing every time. I'm doing my best. Even when I said that, Jack didn't seem to take me seriously.
Mom's been tough on me since I was little. It's just the same now. But it's because she cares about us.
Listening to him, I felt that something wasn't right. The fact that Mary was strict with him growing up doesn't justify her snide remarks and criticism toward me. Even if I said that, I'm sure Jack wouldn't understand. Every time Mary visits, she transforms into the doting mother who pampers her beloved son. The same person who throws harsh words at me, with a face like a monster, becomes a completely different person in front of Jack.
Jack, you must have had a tough day at work today, right?
She speaks in an unbelievably sweet voice, smiling warmly as if she doesn't even notice my presence. The sound of her voice sends chills down my spine.
I can do my best because Mom is with me.
Jack responds as if it's the most natural thing, like a child seeking comfort from his mother. What is this scene? This can't be real. And each time, I find myself internally cringing. I struggle to understand why her attitude changes so drastically. Watching the two of them in their own world, I feel completely left out. No, rather, I realize I don't even want to belong in that world. Even after Mary leaves, her overly sweet voice lingers in my mind, filling me with a sense of discomfort. Why am I the only one who has to deal with this? I can't help but sigh. The fact that Jack remains oblivious only deepens my frustration. As Mary's behavior escalates day by day, I feel an increasing urgency to do something about this situation. However, Jack still seems unaware of Mary's actions, and it feels as though he dismisses my distress. As a result, every time Mary visits, the weight in my heart grows heavier. Hearing the sound of her footsteps entering the room alone makes me feel a tightening in my chest. Why am I the only one who has to suffer like this? I might just break down soon. I finally started to feel a sense of fear. One evening, when Mary visited us as usual, I felt I had reached my limit. The moment she started complaining about my work again, I stood up and faced her directly. "Mary, I'm sorry, but could you please refrain from visiting during my work hours from now on? If I can't focus on my work, it might cause problems for my company." I said it as calmly as I could, but I was boiling with my anger. Mary looked a bit surprised at first, but then she quickly smiled, raising the corners of her mouth.
You're right. Work is important. I understand. I'll be more careful from now on.
"Thank you." I was taken aback by her unexpected response, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't really understand. There was something about her smile that felt like she was hiding something. Even after that, Mary's visits continued, and the snide remarks didn't stop. The more this went on, the stronger my determination became to do something about the situation. But despite my efforts, I was growing more exhausted by the day, unable to find a solution. Eventually, I started thinking that it would be difficult to resolve this problem on my own. Unless Jack stood by my side, I doubted the situation with Mary would ever improve. However, I had no idea when he might come to his senses. Mary's harassment escalated day by day. What started as simple complaints gradually turned into her entering my workspace, our bedroom, without permission, touching furniture and books without any regard. Honestly, it's extremely stressful. But I tell myself that I have no choice but to endure it. One day, Mary came into my room again. As usual, she looked around, making snide comments, but suddenly her eyes locked onto a locked cabinet.
Hey, what's in there?
"Nothing. It's just where I keep my work materials."
If it's just work materials, then why is it locked? Tell me.
Mary raised her voice, trying to force open the cabinet. I hurriedly tried to stop her. "Mary, there are important things in there. Please don't touch it."
If it's really important, then you should show me. Are you hiding something? You wouldn't lock it unless you had something to hide, right?
Ignoring my words, she continued trying to open the cabinet. "Come on, you're being persistent. It has nothing to do with you, Mary." I pleaded desperately. Mary stared at the cabinet for a moment before finally backing off, but she continued to show an obsessive interest in it. However, it didn't stop there. Mary's harassment escalated to throwing things and, at times, even acting as if she was going to hit me. "What are you doing, Mary? Stop it!" I told her repeatedly, but her erratic behavior continued. She suddenly grabbed my shoulder and shook me hard.
Why won't you listen to me more?
"What are you talking about? I'm not a child, and I haven't done anything wrong."
Do you really think that excuse is going to work?
It would have been easy to shake off her hand, but I was worried that if I did, she might exaggerate and accuse me later. Feeling trapped, I found myself getting closer and closer to my breaking point. The worst happened one day. I was attending a remote meeting as usual, with Jack also joining from the other side of the screen. Suddenly, Mary entered my room. Feeling a sense of dread, I glanced at her, but she headed straight for the cabinet. "This can't be happening. Mary, stop." I desperately pleaded with my eyes, but there was no way she would understand. Something was off with her that day. There was a madness in her eyes. Something is wrong. Jack, help me. I shouted towards Jack. At that moment, Jack, sensing the urgency in my voice, spoke with a tense tone.
Hey, are you okay? What's going on?
Jack, Mary is. I tried to explain the situation, but just as I was about to, Mary pulled out a lighter and a bottle of oil from her pocket. No, stop it. I felt my whole body tremble with fear. Jack's voice echoed again from the screen.
Hey, what is she doing? Stop her now.
But Mary didn't react to Jack's voice. No, she probably didn't hear him at all. Without any reaction to his voice, she opened the oil can and poured it over the cabinet. At that moment, I lost myself in fear and anger, leapt out of my chair, and ran toward Mary. Stop it. I grabbed her arm, desperately trying to stop her. But Mary pushed my hand away, preventing me from getting closer. In the struggle, I lost my balance, fell to the floor, and hit my head hard. Ouch! In that instant, Mary lit the lighter and brought it close to the cabinet. The cabinet burst into flames instantly. Smoke began to fill the room. Somebody help! As my consciousness started to fade, I let out a desperate scream. I thought I heard Jack's voice again from the other side of the screen.
Damn it, I'm coming over right now.
What's going on? What's happening?
Colleagues who were also in the remote meeting started raising their voices, trying to understand the situation.
There's a fire. Get out now.
I heard someone shout, but my body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, frozen with fear and shock. Mary, please, stop it. I pleaded with her, using every ounce of strength I had left, but she wouldn't listen at all.
Do you understand now? You can't handle a job. You don't need any of this.
Her words filled me with a sense of despair. Anger and sadness surged within me all at once. It was so overwhelming that it made me forget my pain. I forced myself to stand and tried to put out the fire using a blanket. However, the flames were stronger than I expected, spreading and burning through the blanket. Please, put it out. I prayed desperately in my heart, trying everything to extinguish the fire. Eventually, the fire died down, leaving the room filled with the smell of smoke and the charred remains of the cabinet. I collapsed on the spot, my body trembling from the pain in my head and the shock of it all.
This is what happens when you defy me. Maybe now you'll start listening.
Mary said coldly, smiling in satisfaction. Just then, I heard footsteps outside the room, and Jack burst in.
What happened?
He rushed over to me, his eyes widening as he saw the charred cabinet. Of course, the materials inside were also burned.
Mom, what did you do?
Jack confronted Mary, but she seemed unresponsive, staring blankly at one spot.
I'm calling the police.
But at that moment, a loud voice boomed from the computer speakers.
What?
Mary snapped out of her trance, looking around in confusion. Her expression changed abruptly. I could see her confusion and shock quickly turning into fear and anger. She stood frozen for a few seconds, but then she regained her usual defiant attitude.
What the hell? How did it come to this?
Mary shouted in a trembling voice.
What are you doing, Mom?
Jack's face was a mix of panic and anger as he glared sharply at Mary. He shouted as he approached her.
No, Jack, it's just because Emily was being insolent.
Mary tried to make excuses, but her words didn't come out right. She glanced at me briefly before turning back to Jack.
Insolent? What did Emily do? Do you understand how dangerous and unacceptable what you're doing is?
But you don't know what she said to me, Jack. I'm just doing this for you.
Enough. Just be quiet, Mom.
Jack shouted, and Mary fell silent, standing there frozen. She looked like a frightened child, unable to respond.
Jack, I was just.
Mom, I don't want to hear any more excuses. What you did is unforgivable, no matter the reason.
Mary was left speechless by Jack's words, her face turning pale as she stood there. She seemed to realize that the situation had completely changed and looked increasingly confused.
Jack, why are you talking to me like this? You've never raised your voice at me before. It's because of her, isn't it? I was just trying to.
I said, enough with your excuses.
Jack gave Mary a cold, piercing look.
What you did is a crime, Mom. You need to understand that.
Mary's expression crumbled at those words. She seemed to finally grasp that she was cornered, covering her face with her hands as she began to cry.
How did it come to this?
Mary's sobs echoed through the room, but Jack looked down at her with a cold stare.
How did it come to this? You did all of this, Mom.
Jack snapped, glaring fiercely at her. Mary froze, silent as ice, and clamped her mouth shut. The room fell silent, and I collapsed to the floor. The pain in my head and the emotional shock overwhelmed me again, and tears streamed down my face. I never imagined Mary would go this far.
Hey, someone. Call an ambulance.
Jack shouted, and our colleagues on the other side of the screen responded immediately.
We've already called for help. It's on its way.
Even from a distance, I could hear their voices. Within minutes, the ambulance and police arrived, and Mary was arrested without resistance. Even at that moment, she looked as if she didn't understand what was happening.
Why me?
Mary muttered in a small voice, but no one paid attention to her. I later learned that my colleagues had noticed something was wrong and called the police immediately. Thanks to them, my life was saved.
I'm really sorry.
Jack sat next to me, holding back tears as he apologized.
I never expected my mom to do something like this.
Jack. I held his hand. I'm glad you noticed, but what do we do now? The room is burned, and Mary.
We can remodel the house. And as for my mom, I'll handle it. Let's focus on getting you treated first.
Jack nodded firmly. That night, I was treated at the hospital, and it was confirmed that my life was not in danger. However, a deep wound remained in my heart. I couldn't understand where Mary's hostility and hatred toward me came from or what drove her to such an extreme.
From now on, I'll protect you, Emily.
Jack's words were my only solace. After Mary's arrest, our lives changed completely. The police conducted an investigation at the scene, examining the charred cabinet and the room in detail before asking us to accompany them to the station. There, we were questioned separately, and I had to recount in detail the harassment Mary had subjected me to.
How did you feel when Mary set the fire with the lighter?
The detective's question left me momentarily speechless. I felt fear and despair. I couldn't understand why she hated me so much. Tears flowed naturally. As the questioning continued, the terror of the moment Mary started the fire kept resurfacing in my mind. Meanwhile, Jack was also being questioned. He was also in shock over his mom's behavior and explained everything to the police with a resolute attitude.
I never thought my mom was capable of this. I should have noticed Emily's suffering sooner,
He said with a weary expression. For a while after that, we lived in relative peace. However, that peace was short-lived. I learned from a call from Jack that Mary had been released. It had only been a few months since the fire. I received the news of her release on a calm afternoon. That afternoon, I was just brewing a cup of coffee, planning to take a short break between work. But a sudden phone call shattered the calm.
She's being released.
What? Already? As soon as I hung up the phone with Jack, my anxiety that had been lurking in my chest suddenly surged. I had never considered the possibility of Mary getting out of prison. No, I didn't want to think about it exactly. I truly believed I'd never have to see Mary again. My voice was so calm that I was surprised. But the emotions behind those words were much heavier than I had anticipated. When Jack returned home later, I could see the same worry mirrored in his eyes.
After everything she did, she's already being released.
Jack, sitting next to me, let out a heavy sigh and stared silently at the ceiling for a while. We hadn't truly believed that the fear from that incident was entirely over, but we thought Mary would stay in prison for a while longer. We never imagined she'd come back so soon. I felt the slight relief that had started to grow and my heart crumble in an instant. She must have faced some sort of punishment. I'd like to think she's reflected on what she did. I muttered softly, watching Jack's reaction. He closed his eyes for a moment, deep in thought, then opened them and slowly shook his head at me.
I don't know. Knowing my mom, she might not change so easily.
His words carried a deep disappointment towards his mom and a sense of responsibility for involving me in all this. All I could do was nod quietly. The harsh reality we had to face stood before us once again. A few days later, we heard a rumor that was hard to believe. We heard from the neighbors that Mary was talking as if she were the victim.
Because of Emily, I was framed. I didn't do anything wrong.
When I heard those words, I felt more disbelief and disappointment than anger. Not only did she show no remorse for the incident, but she was also trying to justify herself and paint me as the villain. I can't believe it. She's still saying things like that. Mary had committed the serious crime of arson. That was an undeniable fact. Yet, she refused to admit it and was trying to spread lies to those around her. I was completely exasperated by it. Jack, sitting next to me, furrowed his brow and let out a deep sigh of frustration.
I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. Everything Mom did is a fact, and we have solid evidence of the arson. We even have the footage from that online meeting.
He said this firmly. He was right. On the day of the incident, the moment Mary set the fire was all captured on video during the remote meeting. Our colleagues who were in the meeting also witnessed it, and their testimonies would be enough evidence. I spoke calmly. We have no choice but to use that footage and report it to the police again. If Mary continues to spread lies, we can't just stay silent. After discussing it, we decided to tell the truth to our relatives and neighbors. We couldn't let Mary's lies and malice affect us any longer. It was time to present the facts and show the evidence clearly. A few days later, we brought the footage from the online meeting and began explaining the situation to our relatives and neighbors. In the video, you could clearly see Mary holding me down and trying to set the cabinet on fire. We also showed the testimony collected from my colleagues. At first, Mary shouted and tried to argue that it was all fabricated. But as time went on, the confidence faded from her face and anxiety began to show.
That must be fake.
She shouted desperately, glaring at us, but we remained calm. Jack quietly spoke to Mary.
Mom, there's no point in denying the truth any longer. Everyone who saw the footage understands what happened. If you keep lying, you're only hurting yourself.
Mary fell silent for a moment. Her face turned pale and she looked as if she was terrified. Then she finally collapsed into a chair.
This wasn't supposed to happen.
She whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Maybe she was beginning to understand the consequences of her actions now that she had been pushed this far. Still, something didn't sit right with me. I still didn't understand why she harbored so much hatred toward me. But we decided that we would no longer be swayed by Mary's lies or malice. The scars from this incident were deep, but I was now determined to stand firm and protect the truth with Jack. Weeks later, I began to slowly regain my composure. Seeing Mary finally admit her guilt brought a surge of emotions that had been suppressed for a long time. However, it wasn't anger or sadness. It was a calm resolve. As I watched her face, filled with regret, I prepared my words I needed to say in that moment. There might be something behind Mary's actions that led her to go this far, but to protect our family, we need to make the decision to sever ties for now. It's time for Jack and me to discuss what steps to take next. One night, I called Jack into the living room to discuss what we should do from here on. The quiet night felt like it was forcing us to make a heavy decision. Jack, what should we do?
It's about Mom, isn't it?
Jack's voice was tinged with exhaustion, but he quickly began speaking.
To be honest, leaving it to the police might be the safest option for us.
I nodded. The fact that Mary had tried to harm us didn't change. There was still a chance she could do something again. However, I had mixed feelings about it. Mary had indeed taken dangerous actions, but I couldn't help but feel that, somewhere along the way, she had broken down. The tears and regret she showed before us remained in my mind. If we really turn Mary over to the police, what happens next? Honestly, I'm scared of the outcome. I expressed my honest feelings. Jack remained silent for a while, deep in thought, and then quietly continued.
I feel conflicted about Mom. Even after everything she did, part of me still feels attached to her. But at the same time, I know it's hard to keep having a relationship with her.
Yeah, I feel the same. To prevent Mary from doing anything dangerous again, maybe it is best to leave it to the police. But is that really the happiest choice for us? I stumbled over my words. Cutting ties completely with Mary might bring us peace, but involving the police didn't seem like the best solution.
Even if we don't involve the police, I'm planning to cut ties with Mom. I'm not giving her any more chances to be involved with us. That's the safest way.
Cutting ties. But I'm also scared to continue dealing with Mary. That's true. We both fell silent, lost in thought. As our conflicting feelings about Mary swirled, the path we needed to take slowly became clear. We decided not to turn her over to the police, but instead to completely sever ties with her.
Okay, we won't involve the police. But no matter what she says from now on, she's no longer part of our lives. That's the final decision.
Yeah, you're right. We have no choice but to completely cut ties with Mary. We can't let her ruin our lives any further. By making this decision, we finally reached a conclusion. We hoped that severing ties with Mary would bring us the peace we needed. After that, we prepared for a final meeting to formally tell Mary that we were cutting ties with her. This would be the end of everything. I invited Mary to our home, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Mary. She responded to my voice, looking at me with a tired expression. There was a hint of regret in her face, as if something inside her had broken. She still seemed unsettled, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Perhaps she was holding on to the expectation that she might be forgiven. I won't be involving the police any further. The moment Mary heard those words, she looked relieved. She had been holding her breath, and I saw her shoulders relax as she let out a sigh of relief. She probably thought everything would be forgiven, but I knew she didn't understand the full reality of the situation. I also knew how heavy the next words I would say would be for her.
Thank you, Emily. I can't bear any more hardship. I'm sorry.
But at that moment, I continued in a calm and firm tone. But Mary, don't misunderstand.
What?
The relief on Mary's face vanished instantly, and tension returned. After watching her expression change, I looked at her coldly and spoke clearly. We won't involve the police any further, but we are cutting all ties with you.
Cutting ties.
Mary responded in a faint voice. There was a clear note of fear in her voice. She quickly became distressed and began to speak with a trembling voice.
Wait, Emily. You're abandoning me? Aren't we family? Why would you do this?
I had no intention of listening to Mary's desperate plea. We could no longer let her control our lives. I was convinced this was the best choice to ensure our safety and peace. Reaffirming this decision in my heart, I responded firmly. Yes, we are cutting ties. We're moving away, and we won't tell you where. We're severing all connections from now on. Mary froze in place, her trembling hands resting on the table as she listened to my words. It seemed she finally realized that we were serious. She opened her mouth several times as if trying to respond, but no words came out.
Please, wait, Emily. Let's talk about this. It's all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to for Jack.
Mary pleaded desperately in a trembling voice, but it lacked the strength it once had. It sounded weak and fragile. It was as if she had finally realized that she was on the verge of losing something. At that moment, Jack stepped forward and quietly spoke.
Mom, it's over. You can't keep hurting Emily anymore.
Mary reached out toward her son, trying to hold on to him, but Jack gently moved away, maintaining his firm stance.
Jack, please, even if it's just you, don't abandon me.
Tears welled up in Mary's eyes as she pleaded in a strained voice.
I feel the same way as Emily. Mom, please stay out of our lives from now on.
Mary froze for a moment upon hearing those words. She was speechless, staring at her trembling hands. This is the end. Thank you for everything until now, I said calmly once more. After that, Mary left our house with unsteady steps. I watched her back as she left and quietly closed the door behind her. We were ready to start a new life. We had made up our minds to sever ties with Mary and move forward step by step, regaining the peace we once had. From that point on, our connection with Mary was completely cut off, and we began a quiet life in a new place. Mary's presence vanished from our lives entirely, and the anxiety and pressure that had once weighed on us gradually faded away. The loneliness that must have grown in Mary's heart after losing her husband was likely more than I could have imagined. That loneliness drove her to interfere excessively with our lives, ultimately leading her to isolate herself. The fear of losing Jack kept her clinging, and her continued interference resulted in this tragedy.
Thank you, Emily. I wouldn't have known what to do without you. You helped me through everything.
It's the same for me. I don't think I could have made it this far without you, Jack. No one knows where Mary went after that. Once the truth of her accusations against me came to light, the neighbors began to view her with suspicion. Afraid of being alone and afraid of people's judgment, she sought help from her relatives, but no one was willing to assist her. After that, Mary's voice fell silent, and the neighbors reported that they no longer saw her around. As for us, a new happiness has come into our lives. We were blessed with our baby we had been longing for. The moment the doctor told me at the hospital that I was pregnant, I was so overwhelmed with joy and surprise that I couldn't speak. My heart raced, and tears flowed naturally. When I got home, Jack was waiting anxiously.
How did it go?
He looked into my eyes with a nervous expression. "We're going to have a baby." The moment he heard those words, Jack's expression changed completely. He widened his eyes in surprise and joy and hugged me tightly.
Really? Emily, thank you so much.
We shared our joy right there. This new life coming into our world is the greatest blessing for us, having overcome the difficult events of the past. Together, we will continue to walk forward for our family, building a happy future.